party time. Um, it has been a long time since I did a kind of a response or reaction video. So, uh, someone that I know, he shall not be named, pointed me towards a channel called CosmicSkeptic. Does videos similar to what I'm doing, and I'd never heard of the channel before, so it was brand new, and so I spent the last however long kind of watching through videos of his, and came across one that I thought, that's interesting. It's short, be easy to kind of do a little bit of a rebut towards, and so it's called Homosexuality is Not Moral, and Here's Why, which I'll try to link down below so that y'all can watch it. And but basically, he says that it's not that it's immoral, but that homosexuality is amoral, meaning that and there's no moral connotation to it. That everything, and begins with kind of this idea that everything that we do has there's either the moral sphere and the amoral sphere. That there's certain things that we do that are fairly innocuous. For instance, I mean, moving my hands around as I'm talking, it doesn't affect anyone, doesn't change anything, and so about the price of tea on Tuesday or whatever, and so it's not inherently moral. But there are other things that we do that do have moral implications to them. And then there's a gray area, kind of it's more of a Venn diagram, honestly, where they kind of overlap together. He doesn't say that, but I'm saying that. Because, like, speeding on the highway doesn't seem like it's a moral thing, but breaking the law, however, is a moral, does have moral implications. So, like, how we tease this out is subjective. So he takes the way the kind of orthodox or Christian or religious approach to homosexuality and sexuality in general is that it is inherently moral. He has taken that out and set it in the amoral category, and then spends the rest of the video explaining why. So he says that in order for an act, an attitude, or a decision for a person to make to be a moral one, or within the moral sphere, you have to have a conscious agent, and you have to have consequences of being, or consequences of well-being attached to that action. So, in other words, you have to willfully, or you have to be capable of willful decision making in the process, and it needs to affect either yourself or someone else. Is the way he's kind of ambiguous with his terms, because he says conscious agent, not conscious agency, which is important, because a conscious agent is a person involved. An agency is the ability of a person to be involved. So the fact that he uses agent there and then begins the rest of his kind of the video talking about agency, I think is suspect for me. But he creates this kind of quadrilateral form of decision making. So can you see it? I think it's pretty easy, right? Either affects, does not affect, conscious, unconscious. If it ticks one of the boxes, like for instance, a conscious act, firing a gun, or let's go a little more ambiguous, yelling fire in a crowded theater. Conscious act affects other people. That would be that would have moral implications to it. However, right? Posting a video onto the internet. Conscious act. If you only have the dozen followers that I do, then no effects, right? Whereas he's got the whatever, I don't know how many, 2K that he's got, 200K, then probably a little bit more effects, more moral implications. Dreaming while you're asleep, unconscious, no real effects. However, I mean, it can affect yourself though, right? Eating, conscious, and your own health is affected, as well as the people that you know if you happen to die of a heart attack at a young age. So, like, there's various things. He uses this. If I raise my arm, I'm making a conscious choice, but there's no effects on anyone else. He also uses rolling over in bed. Conscious, it's a subconscious or an unconscious act, and still no perceivable consequences of well-being. Although, I mean, you wake up with a crick, there's some well-being there. And the next thing is, he uses the example of sleepwalking. If I'm sleepwalking, knock over a glass of water, person slips on that water and dies. My action was unconscious, but the effects were upon well-being. Like, there were tangible effects on well-being. Therefore, now we're into the kind of overlap, the ambiguity. Was there a way that I could have prevented that? Let's say putting a lock on my door, or could I have been strapped down? I'm saying these things. He didn't say this stuff. There are ways that could have been prevented. Not having the glass there, not having the water in the glass, not like there are multiple ways it could have been prevented. So there are still moral applicable conditions to it, even though my initial act, the one that I'm specifically responsible for, I may not have been conscious while I was doing it. In the same way, let's say I'm driving down the freeway, my brakes fail, and I rear end somebody. Did I have the ability, like, obviously, foot to the floor, brakes, nothing happens, I'm a passenger in the vehicle instead of the driver. But I'm responsible for the maintenance of my vehicle, so am I morally responsible? That's why insurance agents, insurance investigators exist to kind of figure that out, right? Now let's translate this actually directly to the subject. Being a homosexual. He dismisses the nature versus nurture aspects of the debate, saying that it doesn't matter if you're choosing to be homosexual or not. It doesn't matter if you were born a homosexual or not. And doesn't really give a justifiable premise for doing so. He just does it. And so, which is something that is kind of an issue with this whole video. He just says things without really justifying the background for it. And he uses the example, like, let's say it is a personal choice. He says, well, let's say it is solely personal choice, nurture, social conditioning. And he uses the example of music taste. That I have a preference of music, but I didn't choose it. As if, like, even though this has been studied, and primarily what has been brought up in research is that for most of your childhood, you pretty much, I mean, now it's a little more different with the internet age and people's access to things at younger ages, but for most generations, as a child, you would listen to whatever was on the car stereo of whatever your parents were listening to. So that's why you see in the 90s, you have a lot of kids that are interested in things like Metallica and The Doors, and because their parents listened to that music. Or a lot of people that grew up in the 90s, 80s as well that have these strong affinities for country gospel, Johnny Cash, Southern, like swamp rock and stuff, that bands that were famous decades ago that had stopped touring long before they were born, that have this affinity for those musics because that's what their parents would listen to. However, once they get to about 13, 15, 16 years old, adolescence is when they begin to make the choices because of either having an allowance, maybe they're going around mowing lawns, they get a little bit of a cash flow, they can start buying music of their own. And that's when you see Linkin Park and Evanescence and Nickelback, some of these bands that start really emerging, is people have the ability, and so you have an entire generation that loves that music, the previous generation disdains it, and the one that's before, or that's after that generation doesn't really care either. And so, right, it's like, for instance, if you I am 30s now, and I love Metallica. But I also love bands like Skillet and Linkin Park and Evanescence, Flyleaf. But right now my kick is into rap. I've been into rap for a while, like Kanye, Jesus Walked, and Empire State of Mind. Like, I've been into rap for a while, probably close to maybe 3 years now. Because I made a choice to engage with a music style that I did not previously engage with. And I found, hey, I actually like this a little bit more than I thought I did. It's led me into stuff like NF just released a new album called The Search, which you should definitely check out. It's really good. It's been my daily commute jam. And so I've been into rap lately. But I made a choice in that. Now, I would say also, I mean, it doesn't affect anyone's well-being but my own and probably NF's, right? Because he gets royalties. Because I bought the CD legally. But it's ambiguous. It's still ambiguous. They're all, like, if I had stolen the music so that I could listen to it, now there's definitely moral absolute implications from it. So I think his example there is terrible. I think it's just really poorly thought out. I don't think that it has a whole lot of kind of potency for this conversation. And I'm quite honestly, I like the idea of the quadrilateral kind of quadrilateral decision-making format, but his rationale as far as how he's filling it in for this subject, homosexuality, is not provocative. It's just, I don't think it carries water the way that he wishes that it did. So, I'd say, like, whether or not, like, this is the thing. If you want to talk about whether it is or isn't, I don't really want to go there necessarily in this video. Maybe follow it up. But quite honestly, what I'm saying is, I'm not compelled by the rationale he was using. So, like I said, I'll leave the link to his down below so you can watch it. And this is me, I guess, with my 12, I think it is 10 followers, my whole weight of my 10 follower group, calling out CosmicSkeptic and is a lot more than I have. And we'll see where it goes.